Hey everyone, and welcome to my review for the iPhone 13 Pro Max. So for this one, I won't be going into any of the tech specs. If you are interested in any of that, I'm sure there's plenty of other videos out there. In this particular video, what I want to do is just give you my thoughts on the usage after a week and basically how this compares to all the previous generation iPhones as well. I've been buying the top spec iPhone probably for the last maybe 5 or 6 years now, and each year when I do it for the 4 main reasons really. So the first one, and one of the most important, is battery life. The second one is usually the screen. Third one is generally the cameras, and there may be the other way around. So generally for me, the cameras are more important than what the screen actually looks like, but the fact that you get the bigger screen does mean that obviously the camera experience is better. And the fourth one is performance, so basically how powerful this device is and what you can actually do with it. So battery life, and I'm happy to report that battery life on the 13 Pro Max is back to where it was with the 11 Pro Max, but it's actually gone far beyond that. So what I've been doing during my time, as soon as I got it, whenever I've done it for the last few years in fact, where I'll go on Twitter, I'll create a thread and I'll post my thoughts on that particular thread, and I'll update it with daily reports for maybe the first few weeks, just giving my experience of what the battery life is actually like. And this is the first phone where you can legitimately get 10+ hours of screen on time. That in a smartphone isn't really that unheard of. You could probably get that done depending on what you're doing. Maybe just use browsing, just use social media, things like that, and you might manage to get that particular type of usage. However, to get that particular type of usage when you're basically just got a new phone, you've got the new cameras, and you're doing tests, and you're doing video tests and photo tests and HDR video, Dolby Vision video, cinematic video, all these kind of things that are really CPU intensive, to get 10+ hours of screen on time when you're doing that kind of usage is frankly incredible. And most reviewers out there, most of the big reviewers out there that have done battery tests, will probably go along with the fact that this is probably the best performing flagship smartphone on the market. By flagship, what I mean is not those big bulky phones where they're just designed for pure battery life. This is designed for anything but battery life, but the battery life on it means that it makes everything else better. It means that you can actually make use of all of that, and it lets you enjoy the phone in a way that you maybe wouldn't have done with the last year's, which did give you battery anxiety if you used it in the way that I did, which was maybe as a second camera for a lot of photos, a lot of videos, a lot of uploading, all of that kind of stuff, where it's very CPU intensive, and that creates heat, and then heat kills the battery. Right, so coming on to the second thing, and the reason I put it second this year is the obvious changes as a result of the screen. So the fact that this screen, we finally get a smaller notch, does actually mean that from a design perspective, obviously we do have the much bigger camera lenses on the back, but from a design perspective, the thing that you look at most isn't the back of your phone, it's the front of your phone. And obviously they finally paired ProMotion 120 Hertz with the smaller notch. And whilst initially I thought, when I unboxed it, I thought that's just going to be something that just blends away and you won't even notice it, but I can actually report that it is something that you do notice. Now, Apple have been very clever, and this is something that I actually predicted after the keynote, where I didn't think that they would give us the battery percentage back, and yeah, they didn't. And what they actually did was make the time and the 3 or 4 icons that you get in the top right bigger, so they actually stand out more, which for everybody else, they will probably moan, but as you can see from my homepage, I use a battery widget anyway because I do use AirPods and other devices with it, and having the battery percentage there isn't really that big of an issue for me. But the fact that you now have a slightly bigger time in the top left, that I do actually quite like. And when you're in apps, and obviously I do have an Apple Watch as well, and most of the time if you're on the home screen or anything like that, you can see the time. But if you're within an app and you want to just quickly glance the time, it is actually quite helpful to have that slightly bigger text there, as much as most people will find it hilarious that Apple went to such extents just to hide the battery percentage from that notch area, if you like. Coming on to the 120 Hertz, yes, it is instantly noticeable. The first time you unlock the phone, everything that you do on the home screen, it is very, very noticeable, and I've actually made a separate video on that will link with the card in the top right or the top left, wherever that goes. I absolutely love the ProMotion display, and it's something where in previous years, because I am quite a heavy user in terms of maybe photo, video editing, that kind of stuff, I use it a lot for productivity, as well as shopping apps where you're scrolling quite a bit as well. And for anything where you're scrolling, obviously the slower refresh rate means that even though you may not notice it, you're actually creating more strain on your eyes. So the fact that this is twice the frame rate, it does mean that whenever you are doing, and obviously it is adaptive as well, so even though it is 120 Hertz, it will ramp up and down. And the faster scrolling and the faster refresh rate whilst you're scrolling does actually mean that you, what I found is I can use this phone for much longer periods without getting any type of eye strain. Even on the very lowest brightness, which on the previous generations, I've never been able to set the iPhone brightness all the way down, and as a result, even when you're in a dark room and you've got it as low as you find comfortable, it'll still be slightly higher. You do end up giving yourself more eye strain because you've got a slightly brighter screen than you actually want. Now, the other thing that I do actually like is the fact that yes, this gets extremely bright, but it also gets extremely dim as well before you even hit that bottom sort of 0% on the brightness slider itself. Now, I am somebody that does like and use auto brightness, so I always leave that enabled, and for the most part that does actually work quite well. I did find a few times where it glitched out and it didn't quite update when I was in a darker room. So maybe when I was watching TV and there's something bright on the TV and I've gone to unlock it and it's then gone to a dark scene, the phone will still take a few seconds before it actually updates and recognize that, yeah, the room is actually now darker. But for the most part, if you're just using it generally throughout the day, it's actually been perfectly fine. And auto brightness, I'd say to everybody, leave it on, because as we've seen with, I believe it was Max Tech's test on the actual brightness of the screens, they actually did a test and noted in that where if you don't use auto brightness, you won't ever actually hit the maximum peak that this screen can actually do for HDR. You will only ever get that if you have auto brightness enabled. I think it came to like 200 nits brighter or 200 lumens brighter. I can't remember exactly what measurements they were using, but yeah, leave auto brightness enabled, because it will mean that not only does it save your eyes from extra strain, but it will actually mean that if you're out and about in the sun, then you're going to end up with a much brighter screen. Okay, so coming on to the fourth thing, and that is the cameras. So yes, the camera updates that we've had are incremental, because the design, everything about it is very similar to what we had last year. However, what we actually have, as I mentioned in the iPhone mini review, is we don't, even though we've got 3 lenses, essentially we've got 4 cameras, because the ultra wide lens actually works as a macro lens as well. And it actually means that it gives you an extra perspective that nobody would have normally used with an iPhone. Yes, there's other phones out there that have dedicated macro cameras, and yes, as we've seen with most of those reviews, they're pretty awful. The fact that they've combined it into the existing ultra wide means that we actually get a pretty decent, you do need good light for both the telephoto and the ultra wide to work. If you wanted to, yes, you could technically use the flash for any of your macro shots, but it comes out like using a flash. It's too bright in certain areas and too dim in other areas. So generally what I would say is, for all of the cameras, you want the best light possible. However, the wide angle lens, for what it is, obviously you have to remember it is still a smartphone camera. It is very good, produces fantastic video and photos as well. I'm more of a video kind of person. Generally, if I have a choice, I will take video, and then I will actually use the sort of photo capture within video, as opposed to doing photos on their own. When I do take photos, I do like the telephoto lens and the sort of focal range change, going to that 3x, going to, I believe it's 77mm. It just means you do actually get much better portrait photos as a result of that. Touching on cinematic mode briefly, I did actually mention it in my reaction to the Apple keynote video that I didn't think this would be a fully polished and finished niche sort of feature, but I'm actually pleasantly surprised as to how well it does work. As I mentioned in the video linked in the card in the top right, you do have to kind of figure out how to use it. So it doesn't work very well on objects unless you close down the aperture quite a bit. If you're increasing that f-stop, then you will actually get a much better effect when it comes to objects. So rather than being the default, which I believe is around f2.8, take it to about either f5.6 or f8, something like that. And around objects, that will then give you a slight blur in the background, but it'll still keep it reasonable, where you're not getting that haloing around the object. Now for people, it depends how close or how far away they are. For subjects that are slightly further away with people, or anything that's rounded, I found any sharp edges generally don't tend to work very well with cinematic video. People, animals, anything like that, anything sort of that's got a rounded effect to it, anything that it can blend, I think works really well. And you can even drop that as low as f2.8 on occasion and it will still look okay. It obviously looks a lot better on the phone as opposed to when you watch it back on TV, but for what that's going to be used for right now, considering it's only in 1080p and it's only at 30 fps, I think it's fine. So in terms of improvements for that particular feature, Apple needs to start making use of the LiDAR sensor. I understand that they wanted to make it available on the normal 13s, which is why they made it so then it's using computational adjustments as opposed to using the sensor, the LiDAR sensor. But as we've seen in the past, Apple did do this with portrait photos on the standard 12 and I believe it was even on the 10R, where they basically combined the two lenses and used the data from that. So I don't see why on the Pro models they can't then add in that extra depth information that they're getting from the LiDAR sensor to actually make it even better. No doubt it's a feature that they've held back, so then next year it's a easy and very big upgrade that they can add on to the iPhone 14. But yeah, the sooner they add that, the better, because that would actually elevate the cinematic video. And right now it's already, most comparisons, when you compare it to all of the competition, it's already better than all of those. And that's something that I did mention previously as well. The fact that I do think that when Apple do those kind of things, yeah, it might not be fully polished, but it'll already, like their first iteration of it is already better than the competition. And that's what I prefer, as opposed to features where you're just throwing everything at the camera app just to give it features and virtually none of them are usable. Okay, so coming on to the final of the four that I mentioned at the start, and that is performance. So yes, the 13 Pro Max and the 13 Pro actually get a beefier chip this year, which is the first time they've ever done that on the iPhones. So these actually get a extra GPU core, and I think most of that is probably to do with the 120 Hertz display and maybe other small improvements that they've got going through the UI, and possibly things that they've got planned further down the line as well. Do you notice the extra GPU core? Probably not, but that's probably more to do with the way that iOS is set up and right now, as opposed to what it may be further down the line, where we know that there will be features that they will release in further either iOS 15 updates or iOS 16 that will actually take advantage of that. And if nothing else, is future-proofing you. And as I've always said, whenever you're buying these kind of devices, you're making an investment, not just for that 1 year, you're making an investment with Apple, especially for maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 even years. We've seen some of the older iPhones getting 7 years worth of software updates. So any improvements in that, I'm always happy for. Just going back to the cameras, last year I actually mentioned that I was quite happy that the Pro Max got the better camera because I want them to make use of the bigger form factor essentially. Now, I've been thinking about that comment that I made, and whilst I still agree with that to an extent, what I think they've done this year by actually, rather than making it a much bigger camera on the Pro Max, they've actually given us more battery life, and that in effect actually means that you end up with a much better product, because I now have a phone that I've not charged for 2 days. Yes, yesterday I was editing some videos and I was at work as well, so it was very little usage for my normal type of usage. So I think I only had maybe 2.5 hours screen on time, but most of that 2.5 hours was either photos, videos, or video streaming, so YouTube, things like that. I was using it at work quite a bit where we don't have the best reception, so generally the antennas are working overtime to try and pull a decent 4G signal, or LTE for those in other parts of the world. It wasn't heavy usage for what I would normally do, but it's still, basically at the end of the day, I still had, I think it was 74% battery remaining, and I've never been in the position before where I would actually just not charge it because there was no point. So that is combined with the performance. The fact that this chip is so efficient means that you can enjoy everything about the phone, and ultimately it will then last you longer. So yeah, they're all the sort of 4 main reasons I upgrade. But one thing that I wanted to touch on this year in particular is the design. So the design is obviously very, very familiar for those who've had the 12 Pro Max or the 12. Other than obviously the notch on the front, from the sides, from the back, everything is familiar. Even the color, obviously the fact that we got another blue color as opposed to being some of the other rumored colors that we were meant to get. But this is the first time, I think maybe since the iPhone 5, where I legitimately do not want to put a case on this phone. Whenever I'm at home, whenever possible, I will use this without a case. When I go to work, I've got a screen protector installed, and I do use a case when I'm at work. But whenever I'm at home, I will use this outside of its case for the most part. The only time I will put it in a case is when I'm mounting it to tripods, when I'm using it with a drone, anything like that where it's going into something else, then I don't want anything causing scratches on the stainless steel, on the actual coating itself. The phone is just beautiful. It feels expensive. Yes, it is expensive, but it does actually feel expensive as well. The weight, now because I have been so used to using my 12 Pro Max with a leather case, the fact that I'm using this out of a case means that it actually feels lighter to me. And just one last note that I wanted to make is, obviously if you are using this outside of the case, everybody has mentioned that your bands are going to get covered in fingerprints and it's going to look horrible. I actually produced a video about a year back when lockdown started back in early 2020, giving you details on how to keep your screen fingerprint free, and that actually applies for the bands on this as well. So I'll link that in a card in the top right, so you can go check that out for anybody that wants to use it without using a case, and you don't, basically you want to minimize the fingerprints that you get. You'll never get rid of them completely unless you're using some sort of special oleophobic coating, but you can reduce the amounts of fingerprints that you get on it by following that trick. So go check that out. So yeah, in summary, Apple's 13 Pro Max, the 1TB model, is the best iPhone that Apple have ever made. Not really a sort of groundbreaking statement, but it is exactly that. It is so much more in every aspect of the phone. Somebody did actually mention to me, and obviously we've all seen the memes of it's exactly the same as the 12 Pro Max, with small improvements. But that is what Apple is about. What they do is they take a design that we love, and I absolutely loved my 12 Pro Max, and they made everything about it better. If you were in the position where you had any product, a car, a house, a job, and you could make everything about that particular thing better in every single way, surely that would be worth it, wouldn't it? Okay, so that is it for this particular video. I will have more videos coming on the 13 Pro Max. I've actually got a few camera comparisons and things that I've not actually got around to fully completing because of living in the UK and having crappy weather. So yeah, if you've not already done so, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. On this particular one, I really need you guys to share this with as many people as you can. Hit that thumbs up button so this video actually spreads out and as many people can see it as is possible, and that will help the channel grow, and hopefully it'll help me bring more videos for you. Other than that, thanks very much for watching.